What is shaken? Welcome to this episode of the Wind Up Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to give it a like and subscribe or follow the show wherever you're consuming your podcasts. You can also follow us on any of our social networks. That's on YouTube, Instagram, the Book of Face, and the social network formerly known as Twitter. The handle on all of those will be at MTGA Wines. You can head to our website, mtgawines.com. Scroll down to the bottom of that homepage. You can fill out the little form there and submit questions, ideas, and thoughts for the show to dive into in future episodes. While you're there, you can also find out a little bit more about us, our wines, and all the goings on that we have around the country and, of course, here in the Napa Valley. Well, now that we have been back for a whole couple of weeks and gotten a couple more episodes out your way, it is time to dive back into a little bit more of the, I suppose, wine production and, what's going on in the cellar, in the vineyards, all the thing that's going on right now. And the main thing that I wanted to get into is blending once again. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking blending. Reasons why we have a bottle of our ever so lovely Repechage red blend that I'm sipping on from the 2022 vintage. Checking that out, seeing how it's holding tight because we're just getting into the 2023 release of this. But I figured it was appropriate. I was actually going back. This happened probably, I thought it was at some point last year, or even in the last 6 months even. And it was a blending episode where we were talking, I think, about the Repechage. Actually, this wine that I'm drinking, it might have been the 2023 vintage that we were putting together at that time. But the reason why I wanted to dive into it is because that's why I was absent for the month of May. Why I'm kind of getting back into posting on a more regular basis. It has been nose to the grindstone after getting off the road. Mentioned this in the last couple of episodes, just the madness that occurred kind of through May and the early part of June, playing catch up. Which isn't, it's not uncommon for this time of year, because even though we're a couple of months away, right now is the time that we are getting ready to bottle. And arguably this is, harvest is always a ton of fun for me because you're just in the weeds, getting your hands dirty, kind of getting these wines started on the right track. But when you are getting ready for bottling and you're starting to put these blends together, you're starting to really taste the potential that these vintages have. I mean, you're evaluating them for, months and years, very typically, and getting a good sense of what these wines could be. But when you start putting final blends together and you have the final proportions dialed in, now you really understand kind of what all these components are doing for one another. So for something like the Repechage, where we're using, 2 or 3 different varieties, a bunch of different barrel lots, all kinds of stuff. I mean, you're kind of cherry picking and trying to make sense of this giant jigsaw puzzle that we have in the cellar. So that's why I missed, literally a month of episodes. And I know many of you are going to feel very sorry for me when I say this, is why I was, in the cellar, tasting through barrels, blending, putting things together. I mean, I was tasting wine 2 to 3 full days a week. It's a really tough job, you guys. Really tough job. Sitting there in the cellar, listening to music and tasting wine for 6 or 8 hours a day. It's tough, but someone's got to do it. So, cheers to putting in the hard work and elbow grease to get these things done for you. Am I right? Not too shabby on a warm afternoon, actually. Well, I wanted to talk about what we were doing, blending-wise, because that's what took up so much of my time over the last 6 weeks, really, and of course through the month of May. And that is the 2024 vintage. So we're going back a couple of years because those are the wines that we are getting ready to bottle. The barrel aging is in essence complete or just about complete. We've started tasting through all those barrels through the late winter and early spring to kind of get a good idea of what barrels we really liked, which ones we would likely omit from blending, which ones, of course, were in contention for our higher end wines, our more complex and intense wines, the single barrels and things of that nature, right? And as we got through the spring and into the early summer now, happy summer solstice, which I think occurred yesterday, the day before as I'm recording this, It's now we kind of have all these puzzle pieces in front of us, but it's quite literally, you guys. I mean, imagine, that 1,000-piece puzzle that you did with your grandma or grandpa, like back in the day or whatever, where you just dump out all the pieces on the kitchen table, and you've got maybe that little like tray or whatever that you're going to do it in, and you just have this pile, and it's every shape, size, color, whatever. And you have to try and make sense of it. For me, and I think, for me, it was always finding out where the edges were, right? It's like, okay, let's find all the edges and then start putting those together. And then let's find within the edges which ones the colors look relatively the same. And then, okay, now we're starting to find some that fit together. And then from there, you kind of have the color scheme of the outer, section of it, and then you start working your way in. That's how I always did puzzles. And that's, frankly, if you look at my spreadsheet that details every single barrel that we have in the cellar, that's a lot of what you'll see. If you look through my little kind of black moleskin notebook, you'll see that I kind of have this outline around every wine, kind of highlighting what we like about it, maybe what I don't like about it, what it could be used for, and at least kind of this general framework to work off of. That's the way I think about blending, is that you have this historical record of wines that you've made in the past, and stylistically where you want them to be. And now that you have this juice in barrel, aging for a couple of years, you're trying to guide it in that direction so that it is another chapter in that book, right? So as you taste through these barrels, we have a few different ways that we do this, actually. For MTGA, it's actually quite simple. Some of you who have tasted with me, you've seen my very fancy, very high-tech blue painter's tape with Sharpie on it. That denotes what's what in the cellar. But of course, when you have a few dozen barrels like that, it's a little easier for us. We're a small production. I don't have to have a giant catalog. I can walk through real quick and be like, oh yeah, that's that, that's that, that's that. Now that I've been, and we'll dive into this a little bit more because I'm getting to share more of this with you all, is that as I've started assisting with Anderson's Con Valley Vineyards and Ghost Horse, that has certainly changed how I approach some of my barrel tasting, especially for those productions. Anderson's Con Valley in particular being the lion's share of the production out at the family property, we're talking a few hundred barrels. That's a little tougher. You can't just kind of walk through, taste things willy-nilly and make a quick mark and be like, oh yeah, that's what that's for. No, there is a giant multi-sheet spreadsheet, Excel sheet that details every single barrel, what we liked about it, what we didn't like, kind of the overall rating of that barrel, the type of oak, of course, the block, the variety, all that stuff. That way we have a really good idea of kind of this historical record of what is going into all these wines. Are there certain blocks that we prefer? Are there certain blocks that struggle, certain that need help with from a blending standpoint, some that stand out on their own? And that's kind of the goal, is having that, putting that puzzle together, right? Understanding how this big picture is made up of all these little individual pieces. That's a huge part of it for us. And it's been a ton of fun, but I got to tell you, it is just an immense challenge going through any vintage. And 2024, I mean, let's even back up a little bit further. We haven't even talked about 2024 really as like the vintage recap, so to speak. And, I was thinking about it before hitting record here in the home office. And for us, like, I remember it being just it was a lot like 2019 to me. Kind of like remarkably unremarkable in the sense that nothing crazy happened. I say that not from a quality standpoint, but that there wasn't like any outstanding thing that pushed the vintage one way or the other. Think of like a rainy 2011 or a really hot stretch in 2022, a fire year in 2020. Like there are some crazy extenuating circumstances that can happen through Mother Nature or otherwise. And 2024 was a really rainy winter. It warmed up and dried out. We had a relatively warm harvest season through August and into September. A heat spike, which there's always one late heat spike. I swear to God, there's always one. Sometimes that heat spike's in the 80s, other times it's in the hundreds, but there's always one. Because you look back at like a 2023 or even even last year, 2025 was a relatively cool year, right? I think so. It sounds right in my head. Anyway, where, I think like in 2023, we didn't press off our last lot until I think the first or second week of November. It was really late for us, you know. And in 2024 and 25 for that matter, like they were a little bit more even keeled. I want to say 25 was still a little late for us. But 24 in particular was kind of like our average, I would say. You know, nice wet winter, things dried out, nice warm ripening season, and boom, harvest was in, done, dusted, no issues. At least for us. I mean, I felt as though we had a very even-keeled harvest for MTGA and Blair Payton, the wines that my wife and I make. I know Anderson's Con Valley, this was the thing. They had a little trouble, as many wineries did, because of that little heat spike that they had in late September, early October, where everybody was trying to pick kind of all at the same time. And you do get a backlog of work, so picks can get delayed, grapes hang longer, you end up with some things getting more ripe than you might want them to be, and that can create issues in the cellar, which, you know, happens. But this is the nature of farming, my friends, is that you don't necessarily get a choice in the weather. You just get to roll with the punches. So you have to do your best to adapt and overcome. I was even reading through the 2024 Napa Valley Vintage Archive. I'll post the link to this. And then for those of you that are interested in past vintages that Napa has had and just kind of the overall vibe of them, the Napa Valley Vintners have a great kind of historical record of that. They are kind of our marketing and advocacy group, so a lot of them are spun in a very positive light. I'll tell you how it is. Don't worry. No, they do a great job. They do a good job. But I figured I'd pull a little excerpt from there. And there will be a link here so you can read the press release and the vintage tracker and the quotes from folks about what they thought it was all about, some of the related articles surrounding 2024, because these are the wines that probably aren't going to get released until, at least for the reds, you know, the white wines are probably out and about. We've certainly released our 24s, you know, especially for what Brittany does with Blair Payton. But you're going to see like the 24 reds getting bottled basically right now, kind of late spring, summer months before this harvest, and then they'll start getting released next year. So these are the wines that you all have to look forward to. But let's go ahead and, you know, see how the vintners here and kind of what the press have to say about it. So I'll quote this for you here. Described as a dynamic and rich... Wait, I'm going to... Hold on. Wait, hold up. Mess that up. Can't even get through the first three words. Let's do a quick pause for station identification. Let me grab a little sip of, you know, some red wine, and we'll do this right. We'll do it right. Hold on. Okay, that's better. I think I'm ready now. All right. 3, 2, 1. Described as dynamic and rich in flavor. God, I can't take myself seriously. The 2024 vintage captures the unique character of Napa Valley, blending boldness with elegance. It was a textbook year for winemaking, yet it was also unusual for the number of days of heat during the growing season. Maybe not. Key to the success of the vintage was heavy winter rain that set the vines up for success. Actually, that's really true. It's as there are kind of like 2 times we really want it to rain. Obviously, during the winter months when the vines are dormant, let's kind of get some more water into the water table, the aquifers. Let's make sure there's plenty there for when the vines start growing. They typically like to have a little bit of extra water then. The other time is actually right after harvest. If, you know, December we get an early-ish rain, or in November we get an early-ish rain, and everything's picked and done, and the vines get a good dose of water just to help them cruise into the sunset and go dormant, great timing. Great timing. We love that for them. It's going to be interesting for a year like this year where we've had intermittent rain almost all spring. It's been dry now for probably about a month and a half. But yeah, it was kind of like on and off again throughout this season, where in 24, and this is a little bit more typical, you will have, you know, kind of our normal winter rainy season, and then it dries out, and then it's summertime, and then fall, and then rainy season comes back around. You know, very typical kind of order of operations. Anyway, and this is actually the next couple of sections will kind of illustrate that. The winter rain saturated the soil and laid a foundation for healthy vegetative growth. There you go. The resulting natural shade canopy protected the crop through the expansive summertime heat from June to harvest. And there's actually a chart there of when some of these heat spikes happen, which is always really interesting to see kind of the ebbs and flows of the season. And it's what you might expect. Some heat spikes in early June, typically right around Auction Napa Valley, which we just had. It's always hot as shit that weekend for reasons I can't explain. Sometimes it rains too, which is odd, but whatever. July actually was pretty hot. August, September kind of cooled back down, but still warm. And then there was another heat spike in October. So there you kind of see this like ebb and flow of the season there. Now, back to the description here. For winemakers, quote, "It was a low-stress year as everything came in as expected, yet it was also compacted, which required the flexibility and collaboration of vineyard and winemaking teams over long harvest days." What we were just saying, everything kind of got condensed right there because of that heat wave, and everyone had to get everything in because it was time. Getting later in the season, you're having a heat wave, things are ready, let's get her done, right? There's a whole lot more that you can read about this vintage chart. You can go back and read through some of the press releases, all kinds of stuff. You can also go back and look at some of the historical record. That link is in our biography there. Now, it kind of lends itself to, now how does that like? Let me pause and rephrase that. I suppose it's how does that translate to what we're tasting now as we're blending? I would say 2024 is going to be, very akin to what maybe a 2019 would be. Maybe not quite like 2012, maybe like a 2016. Kind of like great, solid, stand-up Napa years. Is it going to be something that, there's going to be so many great wines that come from it because it was, basically lined up for us to knock it down, which is, man, I love. The season is so stressful. The days are so long. You're always so exhausted. To have a relatively normal order of operations during a harvest season, just, it warms my heart. The cockles of my heart. It just makes me so happy because it's just so damn stressful. And it's something that can easily go awry in so many ways. And to have those normal years every once in a while is just so nice. Because when you have, let's go backwards to 2023, when you have these long, drawn out years that just won't end, it's brutal. It's brutal. Like when we start looking at Thanksgiving break, because typically like that's it for me. If you're still doing pump overs and stuff during Thanksgiving, and I know a few winemakers that were, I think in 23, like that sucks. That's such a long year. Because even then, you're probably still and it might be a little bit slower to start. Your whites and might be a little delayed into early September, maybe mid-September. But even then, like a long 2 months, a long 3 months or so, depending on what you're producing, like that's just it's a terribly long season. So 2024, where it's a little, when it gets a little condensed like that, it can get hectic. But at least it was relatively uneventful. Again, like kind of this the beautiful nature of remarkably unremarkable vintages where nothing went crazy. We love them. We absolutely love them. Now, I interrupted myself because we were going to talk about what does that mean for the wine. And we started talking about some of the other vintages that I think it kind of reminds me of. And it does, I go back to probably like a 2016 is probably the one in recent memory where I can think of like, okay, like a relatively rainy winter, very normal summer. Nothing really happened on the back end of things in 2016, late in the season that caused huge issues. Just your normal run-of-the-mill harvest craziness. 19, I kind of equate to it, but I don't remember 19 being that rainy. So I think that might be the differentiating factor there. I will say this, based on what I've been tasting from the 24s, is that it seems to be, it's kind of like, it's classic Napa. It is classic Napa, because I think you can look at it much like 2021 was for me. Like 2021 is one of those like classic years, just line it up, knock it down. Great winemaking year. And I feel like 2024 is like that as well. 23 was a challenge because of how cool it was for some folks. 22 was a challenge because of that heat wave. 2020 was challenging because of fires. 19 was relatively normal. 18, I think, was relatively normal. 17 was also a fire year, but that was on the Sonoma side of things. It didn't impact us as much in 17. 2025, most recently, this vintage, relatively normal year as well. I think it's shaped up to be pretty good. Those wines are feisty, man. They are. Actually, there's a shout out to Brian over at Charlie's. He described, we ordered a bottle, a buddy of mine and I went there for some fried chicken and Beaujolais. Ordered this Beaujolais, and he described it as crunchy. And I was like, that's a great wine descriptor. Because obviously you're not chewing on the wine, but it was just like, it was crunchy. Like it was a great wine descriptor. I don't remember anyone ever saying that to me before, but I'm like, I've said chewy before. Like you can feel it. Like it feels like there's this real big presence, almost like but I think of like chewy, like because it's, you know, you get those dense like fruit flavors and oak. I think more of like a pie, like that baking spice, fruity, jammy kind of thing. But he said crunchy, and I'm like, that's a different texture, is crunchy. But that's what 2025 feels like for me, right? Those wines are crunchy, and I can't really put my finger onto as to why. I think the tannins are a little rougher with it right now. They're still young, by the way. The oak's still integrating. It's going to take some time for those to sort themselves out. Plenty of time left in the barrel for those bad boys. But the 24s are kind of like line up, like they're just, I said line it up and knock it down like 4 times already. I'm going to have to find a new turn of phrase, I think. But they've been tasting just like really, really good. So what does that mean for blending, right? I mean, where are these wines going to go when we start tasting through them? Now, the challenge, so I realized this, because we talked about blending in a prior episode, and it was 2 years ago in July that we talked about blending and like the trials and tribulations of it. I'm surprised. I feel like I had done one more recently, but it just wasn't the case. It's been guys, I've been doing this for too long. I officially can't remember when episodes came out. And it's been 2 years since we did the blending episode where I had all the glassware in front of me. I was in the cave. I know the sound was a little fucked up. I'll put a link to that in this episode as well. If you didn't catch the blending episode, check it out, because it'll kind of take you through my thought process. I'll kind of summarize it here. But if you want to really geek out and see me go through a blending session, like that's a pretty good way to do it. Now imagine that, because I think it might also be like an hour long. So you're going to have to bear with it a little bit. It's a long haul. But imagine that, but doing that like 2-3 days a week for a few weeks, tasting hundreds of wines and iterations of blends. It's why I drink beer when I get home, y'all. That's why. And this is the tough part when you get down to, you know, ironing out that puzzle, is that you're going to have those few pieces, right, that kind of fit somewhere. You're like, if I kind of push on it a little hard, like it fits, but this corner's a little weird, and the color here, but maybe it goes there. Like if you've done puzzles before, you know what I'm talking about. And that for sure happens. And then you have like an oddball stack of like, oh, here's like this one monotone part of this puzzle. I'm like, I don't know how any of this fits together. Like these don't make any sense over here, but I got to find something to do with them, you know, because they go somewhere, right? So the way we have it organized in our notebooks and spreadsheets and things is, and we kind of blend from the top down. And this is, you know, we start with our most complex and kind of intense wines. You know, for us, it's our single barrel wines. For Con Valley, it's things like the Aurum and Gustav. For Ghost Horse, it's things like, you know, Premonition and Spectre, kind of up the food chain there. You know, so we have kind of these wines that are arguably, you know, stylistically just super complex, super intense and concentrated, and just set themselves apart. It's not to say that the wines that come after them are worse, they're just different. And they have different qualities. But you need, if you're gonna make the biggest and boldest wine, you need the biggest and boldest barrels, right? So if any of you are coming out to Napa in the next month and a half, and we walk through the cellar, you will see that like all these barrels not only have, I mean, I have my spreadsheets, it's all digitized, of course, but all these barrels have chalk marks all over them of, oh, that's an Aurum barrel. That's this barrel. That's a Repechage barrel. That's a Grand Cask barrel. Like all of them have been marked and categorized in ways as we've been tasting through them, so we can start cutting stuff from the herd. That way, as we start going through and putting these blends together, it's like, okay, we have 120 gallons of Cabernet Franc left. I need X amount for this wine, X amount for that wine. Now, do I have any left? Is it all gone? Did I over budget here? Did I under budget here? You know, you do get, you know, constrained by your supply every once in a while. That's probably the biggest challenge, is that there are certain lots that you only have so much of. And this is something for Con Valley in particular, as I've kind of dove into blending these wines this season, was there are certain blocks, like there are many different blocks. There are 5 different, very distinct blocks of Cabernet Sauvignon on the property. Block 2 is normally my favorite. I love it probably the most, but there are years where it just doesn't show that well. And this year, actually, Block 1 is tasting phenomenally. 2024, Block 1 is tasting amazing. Block 5, we only get a little bit off of Block 5 up on the at that time, and Block 4, same, like only a little bit off of those two. But man, they taste really good, really, really great. So but now we're kind of constrained. So the bulk of the wine that we have in there are from Blocks 2 and 3. Like those are the hardiest. That's where we get most of the Cabernet fruit from on the property, at least in the last couple of years. So with that, I know that those are kind of like those are the edges. That's that framework. I'm like, okay, like these will kind of be the base. Now, what do I need from Block 5 to spice that up? What do I need from Block 1? Okay, I know we're going to put a little Merlot in the Eloge, a little Cab Franc. What do I need from those, right? And as we blend down the line, those barrels get marked with basically how many gallons we need out of each one, which I got to go back through and double check all that just to, by the end of the month, make sure everything's locked in, ready to rock and roll. Just double check your work, always helps. It really helps to do that before bottling so you don't mess up a blend. I've been, knock on wood, very good about that in my winemaking career. Try not to mess that up as we go. But that way, if you, let's say you need 2.5% Petit Verdot for something, and you're like, okay, well, 2.5% of Petit Verdot for that blend is like 3 gallons. So I can just take a little bit out of this one barrel and use that for blending. So there are certain barrels that are kind of like these keystone blenders where it's like, hey, this is a great barrel of Petit Verdot. We can use this in a couple of things to really enhance a few wines and actually create these common threads between some of these different blends as well. That way, there's this continuing story across kind of the whole horizontal tasting. For those that don't know, some of you may know like vertical tastings of like vintages where you're tasting 17, 18, 19, 20, all these vintages back to back to back. The horizontal tasting for a winery is all of the different wines in that lineup, say from that vintage. So ideally, if you were to come out and taste all of the 2024s that we're bottling up from MTGA, Con Valley, whatever, you would taste through all those and there would be common thread. Like all these wines make sense. It's almost like different books in a series kind of thing where it's like, oh yeah, there's a continuing story here from one wine to the next. And using some of these blending barrels, like, yep, I need 3 gallons for that. I need 15 for that. I need another 20 for that. That allows you to help create some of those common threads and also maximizing some of the really great wine that you have in the cellar. So, because you want to use the best of the best for everything, but there's only so much best of the best in there for your top end kind of most complex wines. And then sometimes you need to use blending to help, enhance that in a certain wine. Not every wine can be 100% varietal and just be gangster. Sometimes it needs a little dash of something, just a little sprinkle of something, like Salt Bae, just a little something in there. And that's how and why blending can be just challenging, is because you're just cherry picking from these little things. And there's always this what if. Okay, what if we did another percent of that? What if we did another 5% of that? And a few of you that have sat in on some blending sessions, some of you have been at the winery, have kind of tasted different barrels, and we've talked about this a little bit, is that it can be death by 1,000 cuts. And you can just iterate yourself into oblivion. And that's brutal because you can kind of chase the dragon in a way that's just not productive. And a wine can be really good, but it's not better, it's just different. And now you have to decide, okay, does this different blend still measure up to our house style and what we're trying to achieve? Or is it just exciting because it's exciting, right? So at times I always start, again, with that framework, kind of Occam's razor. Let's start with this framework. And as we build this, put this puzzle together and get into the more minute details, do we need 67.5% of this? Do we need 2.5% of that? And how do we structure this blend in a way that's going to, show off the whole picture in its best and kind of like true form almost, where we didn't just force that puzzle piece into that spot and say, all right, good enough for government work. We said, nope, that doesn't quite fit there. take that out. We got to find the right piece for that puzzle, right? And that's kind of how I think we approach it. And I think it works for the most part. Blending vintages like 2024 are frankly a lot of fun because the wines are just good. Like, they're tasting really well. There wasn't anything edgy, as we talked about, through the growing season to kind of go for it to go awry. It sets us up for success. And now that we're almost 2 years into aging these wines and getting ready for bottling at the end of August, it makes that job a whole lot easier. We've talked a lot about the production side of things in wine on the show, and preventative medicine and kind of setting yourself up for success so you can realistically give these wines an opportunity to be great. And once you've done that over the course of a couple years, it all comes to a head right here, right now, as you're blending. And man, it's when you get to taste that greatness really coming together. So I'm pure excited for where this 2024 vintage is going to go. We're still going to be a little ways out from releasing some of these wines, but I'll tell you what, you all have some stuff to look forward to. I will tell you that much. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Wind Up Podcast. I'll be back next time to continue the conversation. Until then, be sure to like and subscribe to the show. Follow us on our social networks. That's YouTube, Instagram, The Book of Face, and the social network formerly known as Twitter. The handle for all those is @MTGA Wines. Submit topics for the show on our website. That's mtgawines.com. Just scroll down to the bottom of that homepage and you'll see the form to fill out and submit questions our way. Until next time, have a great day, week, weekend, month, whatever the case may be, and we'll see you next time here on the Wind Up Podcast. Cheers.